Houston Real Estate Radio.
Welcome back to Houston Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Shannon Register, and I am joined here with Mike Lesmeister of Ameripro Funding. And we were talking last segment, boy, we talked about a lot of stuff. We hit on a lot of different things. You know, he's been a lender for a long time, seen a lot of things, and it's really interesting how the market's going right now. One of the things that that's really interesting for me as a realtor is, you know, talking with people. This is normally the time of year when people want to not sell their house. They want to start getting it ready and doing some remodel projects or whatever they're going to need to do to get it ready to sell in the spring. But what's so interesting this year is I've never seen a better winter to sell. Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you know the statistics better than I do. We've seen in the Houston area how inventory has come. I don't know how many year low we're at, but we're at a very low point in inventory, and that inventory tends to shrink even more during the holidays as people try to. Last time I checked it, we were like at 7-year lows on inventory, and I mean that happened so fast. Mm-hmm. You know, it wasn't the case early summer, and by now, just a few months later, we're at 7-year lows. So just such a difference in the market over the last few months. And of course, now we've had the election, so we're having even more market changes. There's just so many variables out there right now. But we were talking also last segment that you don't think that interest rates are going to go up tremendously in the near future. People who haven't purchased still have time to buy. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, they can still get in there while the interest rates are low. One of the things, though, that we talked about last segment was the if you are going to buy, it's really better to buy before January 1st. Right. Yeah, and keep in mind, when you're purchasing a home, there are a lot of things that go into that home purchase. And as we've seen over the past few years, one of the longest elements of that is really the financing period. How long does it take to go from the time that you make your formal application, sign all your disclosures, provide all of your supporting documentation to your lender, till when you can actually close? And you know, most good and efficient lenders can get that process done in 30 days. There are some larger lenders out there that, just because of the volume of transactions that they're doing, the amount of refinances, that period's much longer. But you know, if you look at a 30-day period, but you also have to add in the fact that, you know, you've got Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving holidays, you've got Christmas and New Year's holidays. Really shortens your time frame. And as much as you know, some of the big box stores are going to be open on Thanksgiving Day, I can tell you that I'm probably not going to be running pre-qualifications on Lenders won't be working those days, huh? So it's important for anybody, any potential buyer, to really get that process started sooner, to provide your lender with all of your supporting documentation, your income, your asset information, etc., prior to finding the house, so that once you've got that house under contract, you're ready to pull the trigger, you're ready to sign your documents and go off to the races. Because, you know, if somebody who goes under contract, you know, December 15th, you know, chances are if they need financing, there's not a real good shot that they're going to be able to close by the end of the year. You're really going to need to be a cash buyer if you're if you're going under contract on December 15th and want to close by the first of the year. So one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about are the pre-approval, because I think that for a lot of people, they think that when they have a pre-approval letter from a lender, that they are guaranteed they're going to buy that house. And that really isn't the case, especially with lending requirements the way they are these days, money being so tight. There's really a lot of things that can come up once people start digging into your finances. Yeah, there are, and we talked earlier about, you know, sort of the value of just an online basic pre-qualification, how there's really not a lot of value other than, you know, just checking your credit and seeing that your credit score meets the requirements. You know, the biggest things, the biggest challenges that we see with people who don't go that extra step to provide all that information, there are always going to be those property issues. You know, when you have an appraisal done on the house and there are deficiencies with that house, you know, there are either structural deficiencies, deferred maintenance, you know, issues like that have to be addressed. Most of the other property issues have worked themselves out. We don't have as many foreclosures now as we did a year or two ago. But there are always documentation issues that come up. You know, one thing that you see this time of year, and particularly in spring, is people filing their tax returns. These days, a standard piece of documentation is a transcript of an individual's tax filings, of their tax return filings. And
that kind of is a legacy to a lot of the mortgage fraud that went on, where you had people that were providing tax returns or W-2s that had been doctored and were inaccurate.
Right.
So now what lenders do is they take the documentation you provide, compare it to what the IRS has on file, and make sure it matches. Well, if you've got an extension on your tax return and you didn't file till October 15th, that transcript's not going to be available for anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, and that's a required piece of documentation. So there are all kinds of little things like that that can come up, and that's why it is important that you deal with a good lender who can kind of anticipate some of those things and is going to ask you those questions on the front end about did you file your tax returns? When did you file your tax returns? If you're self-employed, what percentage ownership do you have in your company? Things like that. Is your company set up as a sole proprietorship? Is it a corporation? There are a lot of different things that can come up, and that's why it's important, as we've talked about, to go through the process and make sure you provide all that documentation.
The taxes just amaze me because the taxes were due by October 15th. You couldn't get an extension, so past that. So I would assume anybody buying right now has completed their taxes, and you really can't assume that because some people are willing to pay those penalties and they haven't filed their taxes. And what amazes me is that you would think that you can go out and get pre-qualified and buy a house when you haven't paid your taxes. Right. That's amazing to me that I see that, though. I've seen it.
And let's be clear, you have a lot of folks who don't owe, right? Who don't owe taxes.
Right.
I mean, I have an extension, and I was fortunate enough to get a robust refund. My wife was very happy to find out about that. So it's not necessarily people who just owe money, but the fact is, if the documentation's not available, your loan's not going to be able to move forward.
And for self-employed borrowers, it is a little bit more difficult when you agree to get them qualified.
It is for a number of reasons, and as we talked about earlier, there are a lot of folks who are self-employed. They tend to there's a lot of overlap in their personal and their business life, and also in their personal and business expenses.
Right.
And so that can affect what their taxable income is. And in the absence of anything else, an underwriter has to go off of what your taxable income is. Self-employed people, they need to provide 2 years worth of self-employment income history. Underwriters like to see that income history is fairly stable. They don't like to see wide variations, particularly if it's a large decline. If your income declined quite a bit this year from last year, that could hurt you. There are some lenders out there who actually won't even take your loan if your income has declined. Okay, no matter how high that income is or how reasonable your debt ratios are. So there are some unique things that self-employed folks need to be aware of, and that is something that they need to ask their lender about. And once again, this all goes back to figuring this stuff out in advance and not waiting until you find the house, until you go under contract to address these issues. Address them in advance so that any I's can be dotted and T's can be crossed, and that'll make your process to closing a lot more smooth.
Ideally, I work more with sellers than buyers, and for my sellers, it is extremely frustrating when they get a pre-approval letter and they've agreed on everything and we've negotiated repairs and everything's moving smoothly, and all of a sudden, you find out that the buyer didn't pay their taxes, or you find out that the buyer can't get approved now because of some issue with their finances that just came all of a sudden is uncovered by the lender. What do you recommend for sellers? Is there any protection for them when they look at a pre-approval letter and go, okay, I think this is a solid buyer? Right.
And there's that brings up a good point. There's a fundamental difference between being pre-qualified and pre or conditionally approved. Okay, so being pre-qualified, all that basically means is, as we've said, it means the lender has looked at your credit, asked you some basic questions, as simple as over the phone or where you fill in an online form, and said that, okay, based upon what you provided, if that is all substantiated, you can qualify for this amount of financing. what a seller should expect is that a buyer should go that extra step and provide that supporting documentation. A pre-approval or conditional approval means that the lender has actually collected all of those required documents, has reviewed them, has looked at them, has run them through what's called an automated underwriting system, and it's basically a computer model that has underwriting guidelines built into it, and they've run it through that system, and that system has approved it. If you see that, that should give a seller a much greater sense of satisfaction or comfort that the likelihood of that transaction closing is certainly higher than if they don't go through that process.
Okay.
And there's also nothing wrong with the listing agent calling the lender and just gauging exactly what's happened in the process too, how far the borrower has gone through the process. Now, they're not going to release a lot of personal information.
Right.
There are privacy laws. Yeah, there are privacy laws around that, but the listing agent can certainly ask how far down the process they are with that to be able to provide some sage advice to their sellers.
Well, I definitely think that there's never been a better winter to sell. And on the flip side of that, it's a great time to buy. Interest rates are still low. And, like we talked about, there's so many advantages to closing before the end of the year. So not just the homestead exemption, but also some tax advantages usually for buyers as well. So I think it's definitely a good time to purchase a home or to sell a home. And if you do want to purchase a home, you can always call Mike to get a pre-approval. Mike is with Ameripro Funding over in Spring. How can people contact you if they do want to get a pre-approval, or if they just want to talk to you about getting a loan in the future? Maybe they want to buy next year.
Sure. Well, we're very accessible. They can certainly call our office and talk to me directly or my partner Rick at 832-286-1600. They can also visit our website. We have a ton of resources on our website. That is HLSTX.com. We're the home loan specialist team at Ameripro Funding, so that's the HLS part of that, HLSTexas.com. And they can also email me at Lesmeister at Ameriprofunding.com. I know that's a long name.
Yeah, you got to spell that last name.
I know. That's M. Lesmeister. That's LESMEISTER at Ameriprofunding.com.
Fantastic. And of course, we will have a link to your site as well from HoustonRealEstateRadio.com so that people can find you. Definitely recommend, if you're thinking about purchasing a home over the next year, that you go ahead and get that pre-approval and know what your options are for purchasing. We are going to be right back after this commercial break. I'm Shannon Register, and you are listening to Houston Real Estate Radio.